It's Mary at Insight Fine Art Studio. Thank you so much for joining me. This is going to be day 3 and a third hour on this session of this oil painting that I started. You can go back and watch the first 2 parts, and you can join me for this one where I'll be, I think, hopefully finishing this up with some level of detail that we can kind of get to in a still a spontaneous kind of study like way, right? So we're not trying to get like a super hyper realistic piece, but rather a completed and really fully realized painting, if that makes sense. So come on along, let's go for it. All right. So the first thing I'm doing is just kind of assessing. And I think, for me, like mixing is such an important part of the agenda for today. So I think I'm just going to start out doing a little bit of color mixing. And this is something I recommend to, students here at the studio. And as much as I can, I'll try and talk you through it. Um, okay, so I like to look at things that I'm happy with in the painting and try to capitalize on those as much as things that I know need change or improvement. And I really like this orange color here. See that? Let me get out of your way right here. Kind of center the piece. And I need that orange color woven through a little bit more so that the sun stands out a little bit. It's kind of disappearing. So first priority is going to be mixing that color. And in past, you know, sessions, as they are earlier sessions, I am much more loosey-goosey with the color. But when we need to finish the painting and we want to just kind of wrap things up in terms of like relating all of these colors and making them work to describe the subject, I think more attention should be paid to like fine tuning the color at this stage, right? So I am currently mixing quinacridones, which are the red and magenta, and then just a little bit of, and I don't want to say this is, oh, you know what it is? It's raw sienna, I'm going to say, because that is not a yellow ochre. It looks a little bit darker. So I think that's raw sienna that I grabbed today. All right, we're very, very pink still. And I might put out like a little India yellow. And by the way, just let me know in the chat if you if I'm blocking the view, if something is funny with the microphone, anything that you need. Just let me know what's going on. So, and also, if I might add, thank you guys so much for joining me at these little Wednesday live painting sessions. I really appreciate it. I'm always having a good time experimenting with ways to kind of use this system to share my painting process, looking for ways to improve it, looking for ways to expand it. So, feel free to share any thoughts you might have. India yellow is such a beautiful, such an intense color, and you could see what that's doing to the orange here on my palette. That's much better, but it still feels a little bit kind of dark. So I'm going to go in with cadmium yellow medium, which is just a lighter yellow. I mean, it's just lighter in value than the raw sienna, that earth tone here that I was using as a yellow. And I say as a yellow because it could be a brown, it could be an orange almost. You can kind of use these earth tones for multi-purpose functions, right? Okay, so I'm going to put out a little bit of oil because I think I'm fairly close to this color, and I just want to see where we are. A little bit dark. And I put one little dab of that paint on the surface, but feeling out this color, I just want to go a little bit lighter. Move that shape the camera. little more India yellow. There we go. So I feel like I've just kind of raised up the value and made this a more saturated version. So I'm going to hold this up, and it looks pretty good for my purposes. I'm going to just go like one little teensy bit lighter, just a little tiny bit. And we still have that brush that had very little paint on it, so not much to clean. I'm just taking just a little bit of paint just to test it, and then we're going to mix around a little more. Okay, that seems pretty close to what I want. So I'm going to leave that color there. And then what I do, I really like that middle pile of color. So I'm going to match and make a little bit more of it. And we will just do our best to do that quickly. Oh, that worked out pretty well. The thing is, we have some leftover paint here. So what can I transition this color into? Because I do want to mix up like a few little colors before I kind of get going into this picture. And that is, it's so tempting to just start painting with that color. I'm sure you guys understand, but I'm not going to. I'm going to continue to mix here because I think it will be much more efficient and useful if I have some clean colors that are kind of ready to go. And clean colors being the optimal word. Sometimes these colors, you can do a survey of painters, and I think you will find this is maybe where the approach amongst painters differs the most, is my feeling, is that sometimes people will lean towards the side of they brush mix everything, or everything is mixed on the actual canvas. And then sometimes there is such focus on pre-mixing these colors. Maybe they're using like a color matching or mixing system like the Munsell system. You know, so someplace in between for me is like my comfort zone. And what I like to do is, you know, really determine when I need those clean colors, when I need to be like more spontaneous with color, and go from there. So at this time, I have this very bright, very pinky purple. I'm just looking to make sure everything is good on this broadcast. And I think this could be like a really beautiful color to kind of put in along that blue tree line. So I am going to leave it. And then let's move along to the next color. Moving up into the sky, I'm going to mix some of these like yellows over here. So I have those. And I'll swipe up a little bit of these two and some white to start. That was like the cadmium yellow medium and the cadmium yellow light. And sometimes I'll just put them next to each other so I could take a little bit of both if I want. I want a yellow that's somewhat in the middle of those two. And I think the India yellow goes into that pretty nicely. It adds like a certain orangey kind of transitional color, kind of like that to that to that already. But these are very, very intense colors, are they not? So I think, you know, just having some violets nearby, very light, very purple. I think we're going to use that to take these down a notch, because I feel that the color intensity needs to be sort of limited to really specific intentional areas. We're not going to let this get too wild and crazy. Oh, wow, this is a really nice little lilac color. It goes right in with everything else. So I'm going to leave that there and make more. Quinacridone Magenta has almost fully replaced Alizarin Crimson for me. How about you? Have you also just abandoned entirely for Alizarin Crimson? I just feel like quinacridone is easier to work with, and I'll tell you whatever else you'd like to know. And I'll volunteer this, that I feel that cerulean blue is also somewhat on its way off my palette, maybe indefinitely. I won't say permanently, not at all. It's a beautiful color. but the cobalt teal feels exactly to suit the purpose of cerulean, but much more powerfully. It's just so much more mixing strength in that color that I think it's just so much more useful. Alrighty, so this is nowhere near the color I was about to mix, but I do get distracted, and talking and mixing paint, it can be done. But I'm probably more efficient when I'm not talking. But that would just be very, I'm just going to keep talking. So I keep adding this kind of cobalt teal. We're cooling this purple down a little bit, purple being someplace between the magenta and the blue, whether that is an ultramarine, it's going to get you a slightly different purple. The cobalt teal will get you a slightly different purple. But one thing that you really can't do and still get a purple is use any other red. You really need a magenta if it's going to be purple, or something that acts like a magenta. Ooh, so this color is definitely useful and could be great in the ground plane. But remember, I did make these to dull down these yellows. So see how distracting color can be. It really takes you down all of these different pathways, and it's hard to remain focused on the goal. But this is why we mix first, so that we can kind of come up with a little plan. Now check out what we're going to do here. If this yellow is slightly problematic in that it is way too saturated, we're going to mix a very light purple, almost the same value, if possible, the exact same value as the yellow. And to see if it's the same value, we're just going to kind of squint your eyes, look at it through this like narrowed vision where you can see very little detail, and you can get more of a sense of the value that way. So that is kind of why artists will squint to see color. I think it's mainly about checking the value. So I think this purple is still darker than the yellow in terms of its value only. Every color has a degree of lightness or darkness, and so that's what I'm referring to when we talk about value. So this is fairly close, probably to this yellow. Let's see what happens when we dull it with that purple. Nice. I mean, it's definitely muted it ever so slightly. It might need a little bit of pink. Yeah, there you go. And that pink again is the quinacridone, right? So maybe that was slightly too blue violet, but I really love what it did with the pink. And when I hold that up to the reference, it just feels like it's so much more like cohesive, and it's just a nice color. So, ooh, so much mixing. My goodness. Okay, let's see. What else would be useful to mix? And I think I already know it's going to be our blues. And let's see what we can do with the okay, so for the sky, it is a little dark, and I definitely want to lighten it up. And as I go, I want to leave some of that darkness almost as like distant branches. So I want to paint these kind of like sky holes into the sky. I hope that makes sense. And secondly, I hope it really works. So let's see what happens. Let's get into mixing the right color and value to go into this layer. And I don't think it's going to be just one blue by itself. I'm going to go with like a little cobalt blue. That's kind of nice and purpley. Has like a nice, there's ultramarine. And holding up to the reference, that feels pretty close, but I might just go like a little bit more amped up with this kind of teal, cobalt teal. And then let's make a little variation on that. little bit of pink, make that just a little more violet. That's going to relate to all those nice lighter colors that we have. And holding that up to the reference, I'm going to add a little bit more white. Some of that. You could see like mixing first, you have a sense of like what this painting's going to look like. And at least there's that, right? So you're all prepped and ready. It just works out a little bit better to kind of pre-make a little color with a palette knife, especially if you like the idea of more spontaneous brush mixing, like kind of prepare for and work against all of the, just a second. All right. So yeah, we want to work against all of the bad properties of brush mixing, which kind of become like muddy paint, right? Unintentional color. Because muddy paint can be very intentional and absolutely what you want, but you don't want it to be unintentional, right? All right. So holding this color up, picture, I think that's going to be pretty nice. And then there's like a slightly warmer version. Maybe we can just use just a little bit of that burnt sienna, kind of orangey. It's a nice little transitional warmer color. Mixing my way through, I'm kind of making like this little transitional string of colors from this purple to this lighter pink. All right. And just stand by for 1 second. Okay, so good. So looking around a little bit more, I might want to just take a brief detour before we get into actually using these colors. I am going to do a little bit of work in the trees, in those darker values, because that is such an easy thing to step into. And what I want to do is just grab the dark color here, burnt umber. And a little bit of quinacridone red, or magenta rather. So I'm making kind of like a really deep purple color that has some brown in it. And it's not going to be like a terribly distinct color, but let's grab just a little extra terp on this brush. I want it to be fairly thin, fairly washy, and I want to put this on in a somewhat kind of dryish application. So I don't want this to be like drippy paint that's going to be, you know, soaking through the layers or, not that that's possible, but I'm putting on a minimal amount. Let's put it that way. I will put on a very minimal amount of a transparent color to just see if I can establish maybe a little bit more of the trees here before I go in. I always like to start with like dark washy colors, I call them, like dark transparent colors to redraw into the piece. Kind of nice. So we'll just find places that are, these are really in the foreground more than anywhere, but I could, let's see, use a slightly different brush. Sometimes I like to use like a flat edge. I want to find a brush that feels kind of right. Let's see. And then I want to make this color a little bit lighter. I'm going to try to make this feel slightly more distant. Okay. Yeah, I think the flat edged brush is definitely an easier way to feel like a line is going to be a little bit more crisp, right? So you take that flat brush instead of a pointy round brush, and I think that's kind of helpful. At least it feels pretty decent today. And you'll notice I'm not going terribly dark with this color. I don't want these trees to feel pasted on. The whole goal of this exercise was to kind of figure out if there was a way to use layering to create that sense of depth and create that sense of like layered tree branches without being picky or terribly specific, getting every single branch. We certainly don't want every single branch. All right, and once again, thank you so much for joining me today. And if you have a moment and could just head down to the bottom of this video and like the video, leave a comment and or subscribe, it would be immensely helpful to me. And I hope to bring that subscriber count up so that I can do some live streaming from out landscape painting, which I'm going to do some, I think, very soon. This weather is a change in. And so, yeah, I'm taking this little flat brush. I'm going in and just emphasizing some of the marks and maybe making a couple new ones. Now, I don't want to make all the same mark, and I definitely don't want to use all the same color. So let's change this up a little bit. Let's go a little bit more red, right into some place where we'll see it. Take out just a little bit more in terms of where we have branches before I get into the sky and then try to paint in the middle of all of these marks. But again, I'm making them very thin and they're very minimal in terms of their paint surface. So and step back from your painting. Right now I'm pretty focused on moving quickly, right? So I'm not doing a whole lot of assessing, but as a general rule, this is probably, the speed that I am painting this at, if that's your natural way to go, then go. But a lot of people would much rather approach this a little bit more slowly. I just wanted to, give you that sense of the process. But this is a little bit fast. This is a little bit of a large picture for how much time we're spending on it here. But just, the sense of like working all around the picture and really planning the layers and developing it, that can be done at a much more reasonable pace. You don't absolutely have to do this in 3 hours for sure. And to be honest, I often wonder if I can finish this in 3 hours. But if I can't, I can always just like wrap up little details later. My goal for this is not necessarily to create like a totally successful finished painting in 3 hours, but more to show you the process. And if you have any questions along the way, you can ask me. All right, so some of these marks underneath, I think just get better when you sort of emphasize them. And to emphasize a mark, all you need to do is draw some contrast to it, right? So we need to see that mark a little bit more. And anything you want us to see a little more as a painter, you're going to create a little more contrast there. So for example, if I want the center of that tree has this really interesting little bare spot of canvas, and I'm just going to go ahead and like put a little contrast right next to it. And I like that fuzzy edge. So maybe we can even lighten up just a touch behind the tree. So going a little lighter, a little bit darker, all of these things can be a really helpful way to sort of draw the viewer through. But going back to the first color that I mixed, and we are in this kind of middle ground area. Isn't it nice to have pre-mixed colors? Now it's all paying off. It's so fun. All right, and what I really want to do is separate out this sun, make it much more impactful by kind of putting that dark color. It's not dark, but it's a darker value around it. So bringing that contrast, wow, now it's glowing, yay. Okay, definitely better. And we had this moment last week where I think I said that making these marks, this is something like one of my teachers said once in class. And sometimes like you remember stuff for like 30 years. And they tell you that you will, and they say, oh, you'll hear my voice in your head for the next 30 years. And they are not wrong. But one of my teachers said that your painting and your drawing should be as natural as your handwriting. And so I always think about like moments in a painting or a drawing that you can almost like tap into this like mark making that is more akin to writing something than anything else. So just letting that kind of brush feel more like you're signing a really big check. All right. So looking at this color, I think it's, maybe enough with it. I think we're pretty effective. We have some other fairly big changes to make, but before we do, are there any other areas that I want to do with these branch colors? And absolutely there are. Let's go back to it. This upper left area is feeling a little bit neglected. And so what I want to do is just take that thin color and just brush through here, finding more definite edges. But I'm not trying to like define and cover, and I'm just trying to kind of have things feel like a little bit more lively and like there's more activity happening that could be branches, because that's the goal with this, right? I want to leave some marks that we're very unclear about if these are branches, this is a painting, That's where I think the gray area lives that is so interesting in representational art is, when it's kind of bridging that gap between realism and abstraction, and you have the sense of some of these marks are descriptive and some are expressive, and where do the two meet, you know? And I'm also trying to, remember that idea of creating distance in the piece. And so I'm just using like almost like a little bit of a lighter color to break up some of these marks and scumble over and through. They could be very distant trees. There's just something back there, and it's that cooler kind of like purpley color, a little bit mauve, I guess you might say. And that mauve is maybe functioning as like a could be possible branch. All right, enough with the branches. Let's get into some of the sky color. So one of the areas that I feel like most interested in developing right now is going to be that blue color in the sky. So I'm looking for like a decent brush. And all I want for Christmas is like, I don't know, $1,000 in new brushes, please. Just joking. But no, I really do need some new brushes. And wouldn't you know it, it's just a shame how quickly I go through them and how expensive they are. But it is time. And I think, there's only so many uses a brush has. You can take care of it as best you can, but it's one of those investments that definitely pays off. All right, so this is a drastic change. Usually I say to people, start a little bit more slowly. So I'm going to kind of work the paint down here a little bit so it's not such a huge change. Maybe we have like a slightly less light color, and then let's find a good spot that's not going to be, okay, we're just seeing what we have. I like it. That's not terrible. Yeah, that's pretty light, but it's not killing me. The only thing is, it is just a little bit too blue, in my view. So, let's see. All right, first off, let's get more of it. And we're going to take a little bit of this cobalt blue. And then remember, we have orange colors aplenty on our palette because we spent so much time mixing, and we can pre-lighten that orange because adding just a little bit more light value, and let's get a little more orange on it. Okay, so now we have this color, and it's already graying down with just the blue or purple on my palette knife. Add it here. Ah, that's such a beautiful change. I don't know if you can see that on the phone video quality, but it's just like this nice little, like, just mellows it out ever so slightly. But it is rather dark. So before we put down a color like that, let's lighten it up. Little by little. This color does not want to lighten too much. All right, that's lighter. Let's see how we do. And we can always adjust, but sometimes you get to a point with the color where you're like, yep, I think that's as close as I can tell I need to go. until I see what it's going to do. Now you can hold it up to your painting, but I've already put a mark down and I kind of knew where it was at. So I just opted to try it again. All right. All right, I think it's working. So let me try to describe to you what I'm doing in terms of like the brush and the paint application. So I have like a little bit of oil on my palette and I'm not like covering super thickly with the paint, but I am creating like a little bit of almost like a glaze. The light scumbling maybe, but it's too smooth to be a scumble. Scumbling is like when you see those little kind of canvas holes through the paint and it's sort of dryly applied. The paint's so dryly applied that you can see that canvas weave. But what I'm aiming for is just to kind of bring in a little bit more light and not uh, lose all of that color underneath. I don't want to paint over everything. I just want to bring in like a lightness, especially through this middle section here and where the color transitions from yellow to blue. I feel like we need a little bit more. So it's a very light application of paint. Again, some of this has palette knife on it. Some of it will probably get some more palette knife on it in the future. But for now, I am just affecting the overall color and value with just like a little bit of a brushy, light application. And I want to leave, I like some of the colors underneath for sure. It's just not that, you know, I wasn't trying to cover them. I actually want to use them to maybe indicate like depths, branches, something back there. I'll probably come back with this tree since it's getting a little bit obliterated, but see how that goes. All right. And changing colors, we're going to work our way into upper left corner, which was really left very underpainted compared to everything else. And one of the things that I always try to keep in mind and give everyone as advice is just to keep working your way around. Don't let one area get too overpainted while we have anything undone. Like a Polaroid, like a Polaroid. You know how they develop. All right, so we're taking a little bit of pink into the sky, moving through this. All right, and I do want to like mimic a little bit of the sky color down here, and also I can maybe just keep that road a little bit more twisting, I guess, like more dynamic, because that's kind of like reflected, little path reflects that sky color. All right, so moving back up. You always want your picture to relate, and different parts of the picture can relate very nicely if you just kind of share colors and marks between them. So addressing a little bit of sharing that color might just be throwing a brush stroke of color elsewhere before you change over. And I think I can use that nice cool pink right in there. It's kind of nice. That brings extra contrast, focus, attention right in the area that I need it. And I feel like getting that lighter, I'm gonna brush mix for a second, kind of more pink color in this distant area back here really works. Okay, yeah, moving right along. We're just gonna kind of bring some of that shape all through here. And perhaps we now have a more intense pink that we can develop in the sky. Bring in some of this. Instead of those little light marks that were kind of grayish and, canvas, which wasn't like the worst look ever, but I just wanted to like kind of fill that with a little paint. Huh. I don't know. Okay, we're moving along. We still have some time too. I do have to pretty much stick to my time today, but it was suggested to me I just go another week if this is feeling rushed. What do you think? All right, so I'm more or less kind of working around to ensure that the light feels like it's streaming through these trees. Okay, so I have this like color I was using in the sky. We need a little bit more orange in it. Work out this little group of trees, but we'll come back with the dark there. And then a little light here. Never hurt. Put a little glow here on this. Cool. I like it better. I mean, it's maybe not like looking like it's going to be 100% result, but it did move in the right direction. I think lightening the sky, I think the process of kind of going through here and like adding some tree marks, I think it's improving it. So, one of the things that a teacher said, speaking of things that like a teacher said that always stuck in my mind, and I literally hear it all the time, was the painting is done when it stops getting any better. And it's not really done until that point. I added that last part. So if it's, continuing to get better, keep going. We'll see if this is continuing to get better when I hit the 3 hour mark, but I may keep going. We'll see. And as always, I'll always have this posted on my website, insightfineartstudio.com. And also, I'll put the final painting up. So make sure to follow my YouTube account here, subscribe. And also, if you want to check us out on Instagram, you will see the studio page. You will see my own personal art page there, Mary Flack Paintings. And you can see this piece when it is finished. I'll make sure to post it there. So many ways to see what happens with this painting. You can literally watch it unfold. And again, thank you so much for joining me. If you have not yet subscribed and liked, please do. I always appreciate when people tell me they went back and watched it or they learned something from it. And, any feedback that you have, I always really value. So please don't hesitate to ask if you want a specific topic discussed or a specific um, type of image looked at, we could, work in a different media if you really want. So, kind of just using this time to share my process in a way that is a little bit more involved than I can do in my classes. Because during my classes here at the studio, we are very much focused on the students' artwork. And so seeing that artwork through is the primary focus. It's not really about having students come and like watch me paint, although there is some value to that. We kind of miss that because the time is more spent and more focused on developing plans and, really giving feedback on the students' process and showing them kind of what's next and what could be improved and making sure everything's kind of moving in the right direction. So I added this live painting experiment as a way to, just A, try something new, and then B, like give a sense of my process with like a slightly longer time frame. So hopefully you enjoy it, and then please let me know what I can add or change. So let's see. I feel like I have encountered a little issue slash problem right in here. The tree is like weirdly shaped. I don't know what I want to do with that. I think I need a tree going like this way or something, but it's just all too crowded in here. So I'm going to take this opportunity to paint that right out, that problematic tree. We'll just also just take a moment to use up that lovely blue that I just made. And I wanted earlier so much to go in with this like beautiful kind of purpley color around the sun. So maybe now I can do that. I am working my way this way. And just little expressive marks of color. Like once you kind of have things established, you can take those ingredients and you can just, have fun with it. That mixture between description and invention, you can just invent whatever you want at any point in the process of describing it. It could be a color relationship that you like that just appeared on your painting and you want to see more of that. So it's really your choice, your world, whatever you want to do. But I always like to organize this experience and process of painting around representation. It just makes more sense to me. It's kind of, and I understand it's not for everybody. It's just the natural way that I kind of relate to painting is through that process of like looking, comparing, and seeing, but it's definitely not just looking, comparing, and seeing. You know what I mean? We need to cover some of this tree. So we always try and when we're patching up something, make it look natural, but guess what? It's not easy to do. So move around thinking about taking that patch color and placing it a few other areas so that it feels very natural. And we're just gonna stumble, get a little texture. Ooh, that was fun. All right, and let's see. Okay, so that's done. Let's go back into just a little bit of building up of the paint, especially along this like transitional edge. Moving around. We have a lot of nice sort of wet paint on the canvas. And I'm trying to be like mindful of where I'm going to come back through with darker marks and get these branches like back and established. And I have a little bit more to do before that point. So, layering these in, weaving the branches through these different layers, that was the goal of this painting for me, just to kind of explore ways to show how these trees might be painted without feeling like they're all pasted in one layer. And so many other things happen in a painting, you know, so that can't be the only goal, but generally, that was my interest. And the idea of like weaving the branches through, I'm trying to leave some of that darker underneath color kind of showing through so that maybe, just maybe, it hints at being a branch back there. So we always try to like patch things in very seamlessly. We want to kind of think about placing these colors elsewhere, moving around, just like anything else. You want that color harmony to be, you know, color shared among other areas in your picture. And it really does help to like tie things together. Let's get into this pink color. Let's see if we can get it a little bit more vibrant. I love it. Just going over this, I'm almost like leaving a little bit of the tree show through, and I'm pretty sure we'll be able to get back in and do a little painting right over that in a moment. I want to get into, before we do that, we have one more color to sort of work through, and those are those yellows that we did before. And I am going to, hold on, clean that up a little bit. Okay. I want to lighten up this yellow. I also just grayed it out in one step. There we go. A little bit of oil on the palette, and then I'll dip my brush in the oil and like kind of work that through the paint until I get a patch of color that looks about right. And then we'll go in and do the same thing that we were doing in the blues. Let's figure out, and find a little bit more light. Touch too light. A little darker yellow. I think that is much better. Let's see how that works out. Yeah, that's about what we want. Maybe even a little bit more pale. Keep playing around with this color because it changes so much. All right. Hopefully nothing broke. All right, let's work into this little area. It's like your handwriting, right? Put some sparks of that color around. I sort of like it. Let's see. More yellow. A little lighter through here, I think would be great. I know I have some oil, but sometimes it really is hard to see where that oil ends up on your palette, but I think I found it. There we go. And if not, we can always just put out a little more oil. So I highly recommend if you are using a medium, don't put it in one of those little cups. And then try and just dip your brush into the little cup. I don't think that's the right approach at all. I'm going to tell you, after a lot of years of doing that, I was like, well, guess what? A squirt bottle keeps it absolutely perfectly clean. Every single time you put oil into your paint, you want it to be perfectly clean, because otherwise your color is not the color that you mixed. Now, I'm not saying that I am perfect by any means, but that has cut down on the bad tendency of getting my color to be, you know, a little bit unintentional with that way, right? So any place you can chip away at a problem is a good place. All right, so shape-wise, we don't want to get to like stick figure tree situation. We don't want to get to symbol system, like this is the tree here and this is, whatever. So I just think we got to move around and we got to let that brush sort of do its rolling and, putting on somewhat random marks as we move that across the surface. Like, don't try to keep them all consciously formulated, because they get a little bit repetitive. They can get a little bit like stiff looking, I think. So I always try to like bring in the feeling or the idea of spontaneity, just even if I'm not feeling particularly spontaneous. Just creating that mark can be somewhat helpful to the health of the painting, I think. All right, so we are just about out of time, but yet the painting isn't done. All right, let's see what we can get done in the next like 5 to 10. Let's go back to step back a little bit and just kind of see what's like required here. It definitely came along, but yeah, I feel like there's a little bit left to do. Let's go back into our little tree brush. Nice flat edge, super sharp edged brush that we can kind of use to create these lines and cleaner edges. We're definitely going to need some oil. And we don't want just a, dark color by reflex. It's like tree, dark, go. So no, I'm not going to do that. We're going to make like a warmer, lighter version to start with. Ooh, very cool. Sure, that'll be useful someplace. There is some really nice, like warm, rusty, kind of reddish brown color through here. And I always think that the best paintings that I've seen that I always, think about, try to emulate and take those properties on, they have this quality of like focus that really is about, I think, like making random marks look very like read like details, because one area kind of finished in this way that all the other areas benefit from it. So I just think that is such a cool thing about representational painting. And I really want this area of focus here to make all of the other areas feel even more like branches and marks, right? So I think also that as we look at patterns as human beings, we don't particularly like to see paintings with every area focused and completed. It's not the way that we see, I think, my idea. Like the way that we see always centers more on like one object, right? Or like one area of our view. And so in a painting, when we have like everything in focus, there's something like not right about it because it's really not the way that we see. So I feel like just taking the view that less is more in terms of an area of focus is like, you know, a good way because it lines up more with like the way that human beings see rather. So you don't have to have every single area of the painting finished to the same degree, but what you need is like a intentional focal point, right? Like an area that is finished. And maybe that area is like highly finished. And it makes all those other really loose, weird areas make sense. So, and like I said, I feel like that is the remaining factor in this painting for me. So I probably will continue to work on this at some point, but I am going to be wrapping it up for today very shortly, mainly just because of my schedule and that I have to, but I would love to continue. So again, thank you so much for joining, and let me know if you have questions or if you guys have any requests. I'll figure out what next week's project is going to be, and I will share this image on the studio website page for lessons and free resources. Okay. Fix this tree up a little bit. All right. Well, this has been a ton of fun. Thank you for coming, and I will see you all next